Hello, everyone. Setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. And it says we're live on Facebook. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. Thank you for putting up with our slight delay. We are moving over our platforms, and it just took a minute to get things going. My name is Bryan Dunncan. My pronouns are he, him, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about protesters' rights and police accountability. And joining me is Morgan, co-founder and attorney of Lavender Rights Project. Thank you for coming today, Morgan.
Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Morgan Mentzer. I use she, her pronouns. I am an attorney at Lavender Rights Project. I focus on areas of civil rights and family law.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I want to acknowledge that Marlon Brown, a partner and consultant with Racial Equity Consultants, was supposed to join us today. However, his help was needed with today's Black Lives Matters march, which is extraordinarily important. So Marlon, our thoughts are with you and with the march, and we really hope this video will help the protesters or you out in some way. Now, as we move on with this video, and before we move forward, Morgan, does watching this video create any kind of attorney-client privilege with you?
It does not. This is not considered legal advice. This is simply informational for folks to build a foundation of knowledge. This is not legal representation. I'm not providing legal advice in any capacity. We encourage folks to speak directly with an attorney if they have a question, or to do their own legal research.
Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you for that. And now, moving on to the first question, we've seen everything that's been going on in the news with the protests on live feeds from folks on the ground. And a lot of us would like to know, why aren't the police held accountable for their actions?
Yes, it's very frustrating. The basis for not holding police accountable in the United States is really predicated on a doctrine called qualified immunity. It is somewhat complex, and we believe purposefully to ensure that folks don't understand what is going wrong, to create a system where the cops are not held responsible for the violence they perpetrate. So effectively, qualified immunity means that police are held to a much lower standard when they perpetrate harm against somebody. Originally, the law was intended to be much more expansive, to do exactly what you would hope, which was to make it so public officials and cops are held accountable. And that was based on the Civil Rights Act of 1871. So that act, or the Ku Klux Klan Act, was intended to make it so if a public official perpetrated harm against someone, they could be held liable to the party they injured, i.e. you could sue them and say, because you perpetrated harm on me, you broke my hand, I can no longer work, you must pay me for what you have done, and to be criminally liable. But so the Civil Rights Act of 1871 was passed, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court came along in 1967 and changed things dramatically. They really took all of the teeth out of the law and made it seemingly impossible to go after police. They ruled that qualified immunity protected officers in that if the officer had a good faith belief that what they were doing was authorized by law, then they couldn't be held liable. And this is highly problematic because what is good faith and what is authorized by law? One would assume that harming another person could never really be in good faith, or that it wouldn't be authorized by law. We all have a pretty reasonable understanding that hurting others is not authorized by law. However, the police are granted immunity in that realm. In the 1980s, the Supreme Court came back again and said, the officer doesn't even have to have good faith. They can even act maliciously against somebody, but unless there was some sort of case that was decided prior to the event where the officer would know that their actions were illegal, the officer is immune. So that effectively makes it near impossible to prosecute officers, because there must be another case that was determined previously, or precedent as it's called, with the same context and conduct. And as shocking as it is, this is created a wholly vacant law for police accountability. There is very little someone can do to hold police accountable if there hasn't been something that is pretty much identical where an officer has been held accountable previously. So if there's no foundation of the law, you can't build anything upon it, which has effectively made police unaccountable within the law. Now, what do we do about this? The protests that are happening are amazing, and they are shifting the law. The law shifts because of community activism. Never is the law the forefront to say, this is how people should be treated, this is the world we want. It is always that community activism, protests, organizing is how you make the law do what you want. So because of the protests, the national, international protests that are amazing, there has recently been a bill introduced to the House of Representatives, which is the End Qualified Immunity Bill. And that bill is intended to say that officers do not get immunity for their acts and that they should be held accountable. So our ask now is for folks to contact their federal House representative and say, pass the End Qualified Immunity Act. We will have information on our Facebook for people to reference when they're calling their representative. But really, this is watching how community activism, mobility, protest has led to a law shifting where the judiciary and the judges have done nothing and have, in fact, taken away what should be a more just society.
Wonderful, Morgan. Thank you for that, especially the information about the End Qualified Immunity Act. I will definitely make sure that after the stream is over, we will put down the link to the bill down below so folks can have that as a reference for when they contact their representatives. Knowing all of that and knowing the way police treatment has gone, even in light of these peaceful protests, what are the rights of protesters?
Yes, so the rights of protesters, there are some clear, this should be okay, this shouldn't be okay. So I want to preface what I say with that every right in the United States is discretionarily applied. That means that someone makes a determination as to whether a right that is written should be applied the same to one person as another person. And we know from our protests, from living in the United States, that the experiences of Black folks in the Black community are highly different than any white experience or how white folks are treated by the cops. So I will preface that these are the rights that are supposed to be bestowed on protesters. However, navigating your own safety within the realm of the United States of America that is predicated on white supremacy is something you must always take note of. So effectively, the First Amendment says that everybody can peaceably assemble, and you can peaceably protest. The cops can say that you can only do it at a certain time, place, or manner, meaning that if you can't walk onto a public highway, and they can try to institute a curfew to prevent you from continuing to protest. If protesters are blocking traffic, if protesters are blocking pedestrians or access to government buildings, and that is basis for the police to intervene. The other big discretionary element is what is peaceably. So the police can intervene if they think that the protest is not peaceful, if they see people escalating to destruction of private or public property. And what we've seen, unfortunately, in all these protests across the country is that the police intervene and often escalate. And so the police can make a discretionary determination that's, public or private property is being harmed or a passageway is being blocked for cars or pedestrians. And at that point, they can step in and arrest folks. So you do have the right to take photos and videos of the police, and the police should not be able to take your phone without a warrant. Again, I say should. but we all know that things are discretionarily applied. So if you are at a protest, it's always recommended that you should take photos and videos of the police action. You should not be taking photos and videos of other protesters without their permission. There's a lot of information going out right now about best practices in protesting, especially for white folks that are trying to support Black folks and communities of color. There's very real life-threatening recommendations that white folks need to abide by to ensure you are sufficiently supporting Black folks and communities of color who should be at the front lines of this fight. So the police, you can take photos of them, you can take videos, they can ask for your phone, you don't have to give it over. But again, the police have a lot of discretion to do what they believe. Lots of times they'll say you're resisting arrest, they'll, say you were damaging property, and it can be a basis for them to act. But folks do have the right, especially if there is an instance like this where there's a current event and spontaneous protests are erupting, they are absolutely legal. You do not need a permit, but the police do have the discretion to intervene as they see public or private property being impacted or passageways being blocked.
Thank you for all that. That is a lot of very important information to have, and especially the understanding that a lot of this is discretionary, as we have seen, especially versus the police reactions to these protests versus the ones a couple weeks ago versus people protesting having to stay at home.
Yes.
And so I think the one other question that I have for you today before leaving is, do you have any pieces of advice for folks who are being arrested in terms of what kind of information they should gather in order to try and help facilitate the release?
Yes, so it's best to try to get the officer's name, badge number, witnesses around you, observe different details of what happened, who was there, who acted first. The more details you have, the stronger your case is, because you can support that. I noticed, it was raining out. There were 3 officers in front of me. 2 of them had these badge numbers, 7 people behind me. The more detail you can provide, the harder it is to deny that what you were saying is the truth. So it's really about documentation as much as possible, and then to report any abuses of power to Oversight's review board or police accountability in your county, in your city, or in your state.
Wonderful. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today and filling us in on this information around police accountability and protesters' rights. For those of you who are joining us live or recorded, some ways that you can help out if you can't make it to the protests are calling your federal representative, like Morgan asked, and asking them to support HR Bill 7085, the End Qualified Immunity Act. Another thing you can do is call the prosecutor's office and tell them you don't want them to spend their funds on prosecuting protesters, and make sure that that is something that you can also do as well. Once again, thank you for joining us, Morgan. For everyone watching us live, I hope you all have a wonderful day and are staying safe.